Okay, my name is Horace Carver, and this is another of our land meetings. And sorry, Earl, that you had to drive from Tignish here. You couldn't find the meeting last night in Alberton, but...
he can come here with his eyes shut anyways.
Oh, is that right? Okay. Obviously, you're well known in the group. And want to welcome you. Thank you for coming. And this is a rather informal setting we have here. That's the way I've been trying to operate this situation. The government decided it was going to have a review of the Lands Protection Act and related matters. And so they called in September for individuals who felt interested and qualified in this area to submit their name with some references, a resume, and then covering statements. So I did that, and my wife and I went away on holidays, and I came back and found out that I had been selected. The long sheet of paper that you've been passed out, and if you haven't, just grab them there. It's a little package we've put together, and maybe I'll just read a few parts of it. It has attached to it, the long sheet is the terms of reference. The next sheet is the purpose. We'll come to that. And then there's your own personalized little maps, which are the maps over here. This is my scribe and right-hand assistant, Patrick Carroll, and he has put this together. And there's a little narrative in the back to tell you what the maps have been. So far, we have had various public meetings and more to come. This was a commission that was appointed under the Public Inquiries Act, which, if you ever read the Public Inquiries Act, is a short statute that has a lot of power in it, a lot of authority, but just because you've been given that doesn't mean you have to use it. And basically, if we wanted to, we could have issued subpoenas to have a whole bunch of people come tonight and produce documents and all that type of stuff. That's not my style, and don't intend to go that way unless it's ever absolutely necessary. But if you read this and take it home with you, and if you want to take a couple to some of your friends you think should be here and not here, please do that. But to look into the Lands Protection Act, it's 30 years old. The first thing is number 1 in the middle of the page, is to look into, examine, inquire, report regarding the following. 1, the adequacy of existing aggregate land holding limits given changes in agriculture, provincial land use, and ownership trends in rural communities. 2, options for reducing red tape and regulatory requirements while ensuring that the Act can be effectively administered and enforced. 3, legislative concerns that have arisen involving such issues as land holding limits as they apply to utilities, application thresholds as they apply to multiple owners, and the information and deeming requirements for non-profit corporations. And 4, any other matter the Commissioner deems appropriate to review and bring to the attention of Executive Council. And those of us that are interested in island history, just grab one of those pieces of paper you're walking by there. Donald, I'm going to make you in charge of, Donald, sir, not Mr. Donald, of passing those out, okay? And in any event, Prince Edward Island has had a long history of land ownership laws, and as most of us know, in the 1800s, a significant part of Prince Edward Island was owned by British absentee landlords. And through various stages, it happened that the provincial government was able, with the assistance of the Sir John A. Macdonald government, to buy out those British absentee landlords. At one point in time, if you were a non-Canadian, you could only buy up to 200 acres of land without the approval of Executive Council. After that, you needed the approval of Executive Council or Cabinet. By the mid-60s, that had now gotten down to 10 acres land. And then in the early 70s, the Campbell government, they introduced various pieces of legislation that made this apply to non-residents of Prince Edward Island and got involved in the whole matter of corporate ownership. Now, our government came along in 1979, and there was a lot of interest and a lot of concern about vertical integration of people in the processing business and buying land, growing crops and supplying themselves and taking away from farmers. Public hearings were held, and the Legislative Committee on Agriculture, they had some meetings and produced a report of about 18 recommendations. And this was accepted by the legislature. And the Premier asked me, I was Attorney General at the time, to please get this into legislation and get it through the House, which I did. That report of the Agricultural Committee and the Lands Protection Act, what it did for the first time, it put a cap on the amount of acres that an island resident could own land. 1,000 acres. Okay? And for corporations, if you had 3 equal shareholders, then it was 3,000 acres. If you just had 2 equal shareholders, it was 2,000 acres. A number of the rules and regulations that now exist didn't exist as regards to farms. For example, if you were a farm corporation in 1982, you didn't need to apply to Executive Council to have the authority to acquire land. As long as you were a farming corporation, then you were okay in that regard. But through time, there have been a lot of amendments and changes, and that particular type of requirement has gone. In 1980, 2 years before the bill was passed into law, September 1980 was the big constitutional conference in Ottawa, in which the Prime Minister Trudeau, and the provinces were there for an entire week, and not much was accomplished except a lot of disagreements. Sometime I may decide to write about that. If you were involved in as much as I was at the time, it was no surprise to me that there was a failure at the end of that conference, because there was just not enough compromise, not enough understanding, not enough listening of other particular points of view. But in any event, it was sort of a spontaneous debate that developed between me and the Prime Minister, because the Prime Minister had said that he was taking the unilateral decision to bring the Constitution home, and if you were a Canadian resident, citizen, and you didn't live in Prince Edward Island, what the Charter basically said, you can buy as much land as you want anywhere across this country. And Prince Edward Island took a pretty strong position against that, and he and I had a very public debate. I was only about 31 or 32 at the time, and I really became nervous after I thought about the event, much more so than participating in it at the time. And that was September 1980, and then for a year and a half, we had court cases and a whole bunch of other things happened. And in November of 1980, there was a compromise. And basically that was the time in which all the provinces of Canada came together with the federal government, with the exclusion of Quebec, and they worked out an agreement. And by that time, when the Constitution did come home from Canada, the offensive section in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms that would have prohibited us from controlling our land laws was gone, had disappeared. And so that's why the Lands Protection Act was able to be passed. It's the reason why we have the situation today, and some may feel that that was a step backward at that time. Be that as it may, it's history, and it's the way it is. In 1998, there was a significant amendment made to the Lands Protection Act to state what the purpose of the statute was. And that's page 2 in your little package. And it says the purpose of this act is to provide for the regulation of property rights in Prince Edward Island, especially the amount of land that may be held by a person or a corporation. This act has been enacted in recognition that Prince Edward Island faces singular challenges with regard to property rights as a result of several circumstances, including A, historical difficulties with absentee landowners and the consequent problems faced by the inhabitants of Prince Edward Island in governing their own affairs, both public and private. C, the province's small land area, comparatively high population density, unique among the provinces of Canada, and the fragile nature of the province's ecology, environment, and lands, and the resultant need for the exercise of prudent balance and steadfast stewardship to ensure the protection of the province's ecology, environment, and lands. So far, we've had public meetings in Vernon, where we had 50 to 55 individuals, Morel, which was probably around 35 plus, Montague 35 to 40, Wellington, we got sort of stormed out and no electricity, so I thought there were only 3 of us came to that meeting, but Peter tells me today he brought 2 or 3 besides, so maybe there were 5 or 6. We're going to have that rescheduled again. And last night we were in Alberton, had a small turnout of only 5, but an excellent meeting. And we were in O'Leary the other week, and we had a group of about 30 to 35 strong. Tomorrow night is in Charlottetown. I've done some speaking at the Federation of Agriculture, the ADEP Council, today the PI and Crop Association, which was an interesting situation, perhaps a little larger in number than I expected, a little bit more diverse group than I expected. And I think the thing that very much impressed me today was the wide range of questions and the opportunity to respond to them and get some dialogue going. Personally, I enjoyed that. Spoke to the Young Farmers Association the other evening. There was a small group, but an excellent group. Just sat around the table for about an hour and a half or an hour and a quarter. I was really impressed with the diversity of these young men and one woman, husband and wife, between the ages of about 24 and 33 or 34. I was really sort of amazed. Like one little thing that came up that I didn't know, but I guess I should have known, was the fact that these young farmers are having problems being able to lease land and to find land out in the countryside, and they don't know who owns the land. And I guess I found that difficult because I have a system in my law office that you punch in certain things and you easily find out geolinks, ortho maps, or all that type of stuff. And there used to be a map library connected with the land registry office, and you used to go down, and if your client, the farmer, wanted to know something, you keep pulling out maps until you got the right area. Guess what? That stuff doesn't exist any longer. Okay? And that if you need to contact someone like me, or you need to buy into this geolink system, and that, or you go into the land registry office and they will help you, but they need a little bit of help. They need a civic number, they need a name, they need a parcel number, a little bit to help. They do their very best. But anyway, I just sort of thought I'd say this since the honourable member was here, that, it wouldn't really take much government funding in these couple of points across Prince of Island to have a little table like this, and we would have that, you go into a public library and you look up certain things, a book. Like, why couldn't it be that if Margaret wants to go in and look up a piece of land out in Linkletter, that she would be able to go and do that, and if there was a small charge, then I'm sure the province would see fit that that would be a good return of taxpayers' dollars. It's just a low point. You never know, that might even find its way someplace in the future. But in any event, but it was an interesting point, and it's a point that these young men and women were saying they have a problem. They just don't know who owns some of the lands. And I just sort of thought it was an interesting point. I'm going to go over here to these maps for a second to see if we can sometime in the evening talking about this. This is one of the maps you have, and the blue is the non-resident coastal properties, non-resident, and this is non-resident inland properties, the mauve or the reddish. And there are, in the province, 132,000 acres of non-resident owned land in Prince of Island. That represents about 10% of the island's total land area. So we have over 16,000 non-resident owned properties or parcels, of which 3,600 border the coastline, and 13% of all properties on Prince of Island are non-resident owned. Okay. So anyway, that's sort of interesting. In years ago, there seemed to be much more that this was a topical point than there was of a concern. We don't hear very much about this, not in the hearing so far. The hearings so far have centered on red tape, how to diminish that, dealing with some issues pertaining to Iraq, and also dealing with the corporate land limits and individual land limits. Those seem to be where most of the conversations are going. This particular one here talks about corporate properties, and as was correctly pointed out in several meetings, including the Monica meeting, is that corporate could easily be Albert, myself, and Patrick. The three of us own a company, each equal shareholder, and we have land, and yet we're a family operation, 2 brothers and a son or something like that. So a lot of family farms have been incorporated in Prince Edward Island because of tax reasons, advised by the accountant and their lawyer as well. So in Prince Edward Island, there are over 26,000 corporately owned properties, which account for 456 acres of land, or about a third of the island's total land area. And of that, basically 1/10, 2,600 of all corporate properties are non-resident owned. And this accounts for over 27,000 acres. And what would that be? Well, it could be Bella Wine, it could be American Electric, it could be a whole bunch of different things. At one time, we had a fair bit of non-resident corporate land owned in this particular area down here, and that had to do with Dundas Farms and Henderson Lumber and so forth, but they have gone out of the sea. In any event, we have PI corporations, and then we have non-resident corporations. If it is a corporation in Prince Edward Island that is incorporated in Prince Edward Island, that our government changed the law, changed the Companies Act to make it possible for us to find out who the shareholders are. Up to that point in time, you know who the directors were. But if it's a corporation that's been incorporated federally or incorporated in New Brunswick and they just are licensed for business here, we can find out probably who the directors are, but we can't find out who the shareholders are. So some people decide that their privacy means a lot to them, so they don't have, the company incorporated here, they have it incorporated elsewhere, and so you don't know that publicly. You can find out, IRAC can find out about it when it goes through that particular process. Now, I know I'm hopping around a little bit, but I just thought I am prepared to stay here as late as you want. I'd like to hear comments. There's some business cards. You can send me notes and emails and all that type of stuff. And I'd like to hear your comments. I hope we can get some discussion going. And don't try to interpret my comments as being an indication of what I'm going to say. Some people think you go to a lawyer for answers. By now, some of you know you go to a lawyer to hear questions. And I own no land in Prince Edward Island, and I own no shares in a company that owns land in Prince Edward Island. And the Carver family had been here since 1783 when we were involved in a little minor skirmish down below the border, and we lost, and we came here. And I'm the first non-farmer ever since that point in time, and lived over in the Hazelbrook area. My dad's still alive at 93, 94. My mother passed away 10 years ago, and she was a fisherman's daughter in Murray Harbor. We are going to be going to Murray Harbor before the process is all over. And I spent a fair bit of time there as a youth in the summertime, and worked on the family farm in Hazelbrook, a small family farm, and then we expanded it. And by the time I went to college, I guess we were the largest farmer in the community of Hazelbrook, consisted of 3 farms, and we had 180 acres of land. We're the largest farmer. I know how to milk cows by hand and do all that type of stuff. Strong interest in rural beautification, having been president and vice president for about 10 or 12 years. And married a woman from Nova Scotia. She wanted to have a camp in PEI. That's the Nova Scotia word for cottage, a camp. I didn't know what a camp was. Didn't think we needed to go to church camp or anything along those lines. Anyway, so what we did is the member has some good friends who happen to be first cousins of mine, and they had a summer home out around Seaview, and my wife thought that that beach was beautiful. It was a gorgeous area, setting the province, and especially since I'd just been elected in politics. She thought it would be a good way to cut off the phones for the summer. So for about 12 or 14 years, we had a cottage about 1,000 feet from the shore in Seaview, and loved it. Made some friends up there. Our daughter, when she became a mid-teenager, she didn't want to be out in Seaview, and she wanted to be in town where all her friends were. She's married with 3 small kids now, 4, 3, and 1. They live in Calgary. And so when they came home last summer, they rented a cottage. And guess where they rented the cottage? Anyway, great to have you here. Great to have you here. Let's make this a relaxed setting. And if you want to pull your chairs around a different way, please do so. And just tell me whatever you want to tell me. And just be sure that we listen to each other and try to understand and learn as well. Thank you. Now, well, it's just like this. I go to the Baptist church, and a few years ago, I wasn't able to attend a Baptist church business meeting. And so I was over in England at the time, and I called the chairman of the board to see how the business meeting went along. And he says it was wonderful. He says we had 120 people there, and I think there was only 1 or 2 questions. That's all they had. And he said, just everything went along like clockwork. And I says, well, obviously you didn't pry enough to find out what the true thoughts were, because it wasn't a Baptist church meeting. Okay. Now, Earl, you traveled all the way down here from Tignish, and you couldn't find last night at us in Alberta and everything. You must have a few thoughts in your mind. You're here to listen. Well, I see. Now, we've heard from Morley today. We'll come back to Morley a little later on. Okay, Margaret, you told me you came to listen to the Thompson hearings and things like that.
Well, I have a lot of interest in the farm community because I live in a farm community. Linkletter farms and Morrison farms are predominantly the 2 farmers in my area, and there has been good practices and there has been bad practices. But initially, Linkletter Farms employs something like 55 employees. Most of them are from the area.
Mm-hmm.
So it's nice to see them growing, producing work. But they've also, and this issue may come up eventually, they've run into a situation where they now have potato board this last year. That could affect, I don't know exactly whether that land is going to have to come out of production or what's going to happen there. Now, I know they want to expand. They have most of the land in Linkletter anyway. So from that point of view, I don't care. But what I have a real concern about is we have had problems with our water.
Mm-hmm.
Now, there seems to be better crop rotation, and that has improved. The levels have gone from 10 or above to 7 or below now on the water.
You're talking nitrates, eh?
Nitrates.
And if you get down below 10, it's acceptable, correct? I think if you're below 10 as a count, it's acceptable.
On Prince Edward Island.
Yes.
Not on New Brunswick. I guess New Brunswick's around 3, 4.
I'm not sure about New Brunswick. I think PI is around 10.
It's a lot lower in the other provinces.
Okay.
Some of the other provinces. But where I have a real concern is we ran into a problem with a wind farm in West Point up back of O'Leary. And they ended up running the power lines along the Confederation Trail. It's done a lot of damage to the trail. It's also caused other problems. And wind farms seem to be very popular right now, but the problem is, and the percentage in PEI is much higher than they are in the other provinces. We get 22% of our power in PEI from wind farms. New Brunswick, Nova Scotia, it's 5 and 6%. When they ran the power lines along the Confederation Trail, there's 25 kilometers of it. Those trees have to be kept cut below the power lines. Mm-hmm. This was a beautiful park, and how it started was a number of years ago, before it became Confederation Trail, when the railway lines were still there. The province, or we had a farmer, gave them the rights to put power poles to run a power line along the edge of their property. Well, actually what happened was 1/3 of the pole went on the farmer's property and 2/3 went on the railway end of it. So the precedent was set to have those power poles coming on the west side of Musquesh and running down across Kinsman Road and into Linklater. So therefore what happened is Maritime Electric and the government said, oh great, and IRAC, oh great, the precedent's already set. So it sort of was a little cheat thing that how they got in there. But in Britain, power lines are very heavily controlled because there's also health issues with them. The other thing is they're not very beautiful. They don't do a lot to the landscape. The farmers also don't want them on their property because it occupies land that they want to farm, and now they're wanting to farm every little bit of their farm. And I know when they were having the hearings over bringing the power lines down, a lot of the farmers were highly resentful of the power lines coming through, and what was happening was Maritime Electric was going in and first off saying, okay, it's going to happen anyway, we're going to appropriate your property. Like that was the first thing said to the farmers. And that's not the way to deal with the farmers. You do better if you negotiate or, you know.
Expropriation isn't a very popular way to get along with individuals.
Well, it seems that Maritime Electric seems to think they can run them wherever they want. You know, I know there was an agreement signed for power lines to go along part of the old railway line coming from Slemon Park once the province took over Slemon Park. I happened to find that out by accident because I happened to get a copy of it.
Sure. So there were some hearings not too long ago about electricity in Prince Edward Island. I don't know, were you able to attend any of those meetings? Or were you able to attend any of the meetings that were held in the last year about electricity and power in Prince Edward Island? Or?
I think there could be better planning into corridors. Like, for instance, when they ran these power lines along the Confederation Trail, what they did was they ran most of them on the south side. Well, most people don't go out there through the day now because you've got the sunshine, you've got no shade because the trees are all cut down to about 5 feet or something like that, 5 or 6 feet, feet below the power lines, and they have to be kept cut. Maritime Electric has not been easy to deal with. You know, I got thrown off the trails for asking about, you know, why are you cutting this? And they were out in the field. They weren't even on the trail when they threw me off the trail.
All right, thank you. Do you have any particular thoughts or observations on the Lands Protection Act, about some of the comments I made earlier?
Well, I notice part 3 of your thing brings up utilities.
Yeah, it does.
I don't know, maybe the farmers can make better suggestions. I know Europeans are not coming to use the trails the way they had been previously.
Sure. Number 3, I believe, means this. legislative concerns that have arisen involving such issue as land holding limits as they apply to utilities. So if we have an electrical company, it owns various pieces of land in Prince Edward Island, then you get into the whole area of not just ownership, but you get into easements, because the Lands Protection Act doesn't just deal with ownership. It deals with the concept of land holding, which means you have an interest in the land. So that if you had a cottage along the shore and you wanted to get electricity down there, the utility is not going to take it down there until they get a certain width of a right-of-way from the nearest public road as an easement straight down to your cottage. And therefore, that easement, however many acres it is, and it would amaze you how it soon adds up, is part of their total land total.
But it also gives them the opportunity with the easement to go in and buy the land. And they did that up on part of that stretch of land in Linklater. Because there was already a power line there, and they're putting in the second power line. And we'd already had an incident out in one of the fields where a farmer hit the power line going through the middle of his field and caused a fire.
Right. Well, it's possible that that particular easement in favor of the utility did provide them the option or the right of first refusal to buy it. But the ones that I have seen, as I recall, I just looked at one the other day, it didn't have that in it. There's no benefit for the utility to own the land if they have the necessary easement through it. But maybe we'll come back a little later to more utility discussion, if that's okay.
The problem with the Confederation Trail is it runs level. And they didn't know what they were getting into. We tried to tell them.
Right.
And what happens on the trail is all the ditches can run from 2 feet deep to 20 feet deep.
Yes.
So, and in order to avoid train derailments, that's why the trails and the railway lines were built up even along rather than... So what they ran into is they were going like this with the power lines. So they had to change their attitude on where they were building them. Like they ran into a massive number of problems. It's now known as the power line from hell. And it probably will, they'll probably never do it again because of that fact. But in my mind, I sort of feel that there has to be better planning and better use of land for power lines. And we seem to be more and more getting into these wind farms. And what people don't realize is when we get into the wind farms, we got to run the power out to use it. And it's not just the wind farm and the windmill, it's the power line too.
Okay.
Now, they'd be better off to try and keep it on the road, where you know how the ditches run, and the roads go like this, rather than going like straight, level.
Okay.
That kind is a tricky situation.
Well, I don't know if it's tricky,
the use
but
of land.
it's some of the things you're saying. I'm not of the immediate opinion that they're matters that I can deal with or that are in my jurisdiction, but
Yeah, I realize that may happen.
Yeah.
But I sort of see it as there needs to be better cooperation and maybe better control on where power lines are run. In Britain, they're very, very strict. And if you look at a calendar with a picture of land in Britain, like the power lines are, they're very unknown. It's hard to see them. And they're run very carefully that they don't disrupt the beauty of the land. Now, they're not underground, they're running.
okay. Somebody else for comments?
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question.
Your name?
My name is Karen. My last name is Cobb. I live in New London. I'm fortunate enough to be able to say I'm a farmer on a family farm,
Good.
unincorporated, and I'm Irish. So
We'll be
once
careful.
you get me started, you start to shut me up. First question I have is, you say there are 26,000 corporately owned properties, and the acreage is listed there. Can you give me any idea of the number of corporations that own the properties? And is there a breakdown between farm corporations and others, or how does that work?
Okay. Well, the second question, you're not the first person to ask it, and we are trying to ascertain that, but quite frankly, Karen, it's not quite as simple as you might think to be able to answer that, because there really isn't any mechanism of ascertaining whether a corporate owner is a bona fide farmer or not. And we've had some people in government try to get that information by looking at maps, and quite frankly, thanks, Greg. I'm not satisfied with the response I'm getting back to be sufficiently certain to be able to answer and give you that, okay? Because it's a good question, it's just that I don't have the answer for you. The thing is that we have about 1.2 or 1.3 million acres of land, but not all of it is arable. And then you get into corporate and non-corporate and farm and all that type of, it's real tough to find that information out. And from what I can see, I don't think that we have a present mechanism of providing that answer. That's not to say that maybe in the future that can't be made available, but it's not simple to provide that, and I don't have it.
It's hard to come up with a justifiable case one way or another when you haven't got facts like that to work with. Do you know what I mean? It's like walking in the dark and running into the wall all the time to me. I could be wrong, but we know how many farm corporate interests there are on the island because they are registered. Am I right, yearly?
Well, you know.
I know what I'm guessing. You're a leap ahead of me, yes.
No, not necessarily.
There's going to be farm ownerships that are not bona fide farm entities.
Well, you know, if you had 100 company names of companies that own properties in Prince Edward Island, you might be able to guess by looking at their names whether they were corporate farms. If you had Carver Farms Incorporated, it's not a bad idea that maybe they're in the farming business, which we're not. But if it was numbered 1028 PI Inc., like, how do you know? How do you know? You really don't. It's tough to give that information because I don't have it. I don't know it. But what do you think of the existing land limits, Karen, in Prince Edward Island?
Well, can I back up a little bit?
Absolutely.
We were in Charlottetown when you were there in the 80s, whatever.
Yes.
And at the time, Cavendish Farms was the thing that was kicked around. Nobody's going to be left if Cavendish moves in, the whole 9 yards. And at that time, I can remember as plain as day, somebody said, look, we are the little guy. We can't fight with the big guy. We don't have the tools the big guy has. And yes, that might have been a good argument back then. But I don't think it's a good argument now.
Okay.
And I can't say I'd like to see holds on land ownership, without a doubt. But I have a problem with it. If somebody is saying we can't rotate our land because of the limits, that to me is a big problem. But at the same time, I can't I can't say I'm for or against one way or another strongly enough to say this is for sure what I want. And I'll give you the other side of my flip coin. Like I said, we live on a farm. We're not at the 1,000-acre threshold. We rent the majority of land and lease that we till from one year to the other. Because we're a dairy and beef farm, and living in New London, you know what it's like out that way. If you're not going downhill, you're going uphill. We end up with basically what the potato farmers don't want. And if we have people that we rent, we have some that we've rented from for the last 34 years. No problem. We have some that are kind of gone one year, back the next maybe couple or whatever. And that's fine and dandy. But I can tell you one thing. At the end of every spring or the start of every spring, one thing you will not see on our field, and I'm not blowing for the simple reason to blow, you will not see red clay in the brooks around our farms, nor on the farms that we lease. And the big reason I account for it is the organic matter in the soil. If you don't have that, you have nothing. And it's sad because I know the farmers have a lot of money invested in their potato land, but we've got some out there that are mining that for absolutely everything that's in it with no, and I mean no, respect or intent to pass it on to the next generation. Like there's just no, out of desperation, desperate things are done, I guess. And it's sad to see it. But I wouldn't want your job for all the tea in China because I'm telling you.
I don't know about the last comment.
Well,
the
really
red
and
soil.
truly, like it's one thing to gather facts and one thing another and yes, pass it on. But when you have a small province and people who are so in tune with their neighbors, their land, the right off that land.
Greg.
I just wonder if I can add a comment to what Karen said. You said you can't get that information. You must be able to get how many corporations or individuals are at the maximum, at the limit.
Well, that's...
I know that's different than what you asked.
That's a different question.
That would be interesting.
We're in the process of...
Yeah.
In the process of getting that, we think, from Iraq, either one way or the other way.
Mm-hmm.
They are of the perhaps tentative opinion that might violate Freedom of Information Act. We're waiting to see how that all spins out, but when some more of these public hearings get over, if we don't receive the information we need, then I'm going to write a letter and just enclose a copy of the Public Inquiries Act that gives a little bit of authority to get certain information. And then I'll be meeting with Iraq because I have some questions I want to pose to them. And so forth. Thanks, Greg. I'd like to go back, Karen. Yeah, I know it's a tough job, but I've told this story every meeting so far almost. And some of the people have heard it, attended, but anyway, shortly after I was appointed in the middle of November, Dr. David Suzuki was speaking in Charlottetown, and there was a little reception at Province House. And my wife and I had been invited, and there were several hundred people there, and this was just a week after I'd been appointed, and of course that was the newest thing since sliced bread, and everyone was making their way over to me and making comments and so forth. And as my wife and I left that night, she's from Halifax, and she married me, and within a few months I was a nominated candidate in the next election. She didn't know what the words culvert or shale meant. But anyway, as we left Province House and we were walking down the street, she said to me, Horace, she says, everyone seems to have a very strongly held opinion on this land question. I said, yes, they do. And she says, just listening to the conversation tonight at the Province House, she says, not many of them necessarily agree with each other. Okay? And I think that's true. What I'd love to have happen, and it's not my job here to defend the status quo, and it's not my job to be mouthpiece for government, because anybody who knows me reasonably well, I'm rather independent sort, is that I'd love us to be able to have a greater sense of appreciation of the fact that we find ourselves in a very unique geographic environment, and that I wish that I had a magical wand, Karen, to do some things to help farmers with their incomes and so forth. I would love to be able to make certain recommendations that would make farming easier and all that type of stuff. And I'm not sure necessarily that I can do that or have the ability to come up with those solutions. But one of the things I don't understand is a little conversation that took place in Montague. And that is, we got into crop rotation. And I asked someone to provide some information on crop rotation. And the executive director of the Federation of Agriculture, who is not here tonight but has attended a number of meetings, indicated it was his assessment that approximately 75% of farmers were honoring crop rotation. And on first blush, that sounds pretty good, because if you're going to school, you get 75% in an exam, you feel pretty good. But that's not an exam we're writing. Okay? And if we had, that means 25% aren't. So if we had 25% of all the drivers in Prince Edward Island over 0.08, or we had 25% of somebody else doing certain things, we'd all be up in arms. Okay? And so, people talk about raising limits and doing this and doing that, but I think I need some creative ideas and suggestions how good stewardship and good husbandry practices of the soil, what are they, and how do we deal with them in order to make sure that the land is protected? I think you use something like there's not sufficient respect to pass the land on to the next generation. And unless we have respect for the land in order to do that, it may be short-term goals that we find ourselves with. Increasingly, crop rotation is something that I'm finding very, very important in this process. And I have caused to be sent a directive the other day to the Department of Agriculture that I want to be fully briefed and be able to explain in significant detail the matter of crop rotation in this province. Peter?
What is the status on the crop rotation regulations?
Well, after I have my briefing, maybe I'll know a little bit more, but some of you in the room may know more. I don't know, I feel as if I'm hearing a whole bunch of different information about crop rotation, and I'm not sure right now that I feel I need more information about crop rotation in order to understand it more fully.
It seems to me that it's a way, not specifically crop rotation, but stewardship is a way bigger issue than land limits.
Oh, yeah, no
from
question.
my perspective.
Yeah, no question.
And why did we establish a commission to look at land limits when we've got this other open sore?
Well, I guess.
Well, I guess
I'm going to answer it. Just there may be certain things in the report that the people who are reading it are going to be surprised to hear, and I think there's going to be more than one paragraph on crop rotation. And I don't know, I've been doing a lot of reading. My study at home has got more books on land, and all these reports have been going on the last few years, and right now they have law books. Pretty serious stuff.
To go back, like you're here because basically of a resolution that passed the Federation of Agriculture annual meeting last year.
Well, there are those that are of that opinion.
Partially. And there's at least two people in the room that were there, Mary and Morley.
You told me earlier today that you were there, so that's three people.
Yeah, two other people, I mean.
I was there too, Peter.
Oh,
Okay.
that's great. So that's four.
They will all agree that there were 15 or less farmers at that time when that resolution passed. Two of the people that were there did most of the speaking on the issue, as they did the year before at the same discussion, Federation of Agriculture Annual. I wonder if land acreage limits are to the general farm population or the rest of the population. I wonder if land limits are the issue. Are land limits why we have had dead fish? Are they why we have had high nitrates in parts of the province? Is it why we had the cloud of topsoil going to Cape Breton week before last? I think it's like Karen Cobb said, it's more to do with organic matter and stewardship.
Well, one of the things that, although I'm a farmer's son, it's been a long time since I've been on the farm, but I'm listening to different things, and one of the things that's quite apparent to me is the significant change when we lost our hog industry and with the decrease in our livestock. I don't mind admitting that I didn't fully appreciate the significance of those two reductions as regard to crop rotation and land. I guess if you think about it, my late friend Angus MacLean, who talked about the web of life long before the web was important, used to talk about these types of things. Sorry, Peter, but somewhere along the line, we have these various issues and so forth, and all I can do is put them down in my report as concerns or things that need to be examined, and whether people do them or not is another thing. But so often, the people that read these reports, I believe that they do so with the best of intention, but we live in a political, democratic society, and there's lots of priorities. There's every public meeting you go to, someone will invariably get up and say to a minister of the Crown, well, you have money for this, and you got money for this, well, what about my particular project? And, somewhere along the line, we almost need leaders in our community that are prepared to stand up and say and take positions for which they have no personal interest to gain, but because of the greater good that needs to exist for our province, whether it's land, water, trees, or soil. That's the type of stuff that I think is missing in some of the chit-chat that seems to be out there. Gosh, I'm lucky there's no media here tonight. I might be in the front page of the Journal tomorrow.
Just as a side note on the livestock industry.
Yes.
We haven't seen the fallout yet from the demise of the livestock industry in West Prince, specifically because
I'm starting to feel that.
It's only gone, like the beef industry has only gone a few years since we lost our feedlots, and the hog industry went with the second last election, when they closed the plant.
Yeah.
Like
you weren't at the meeting last night in Alberton. There were only 5 of us there. If Earl got in there, it would have been 6. But there was this gentleman there, and from what he said to me before the meeting, I guess I met him in a former life a long time ago. He was 82 years of age, and he was a thinker. Okay, his name was Herb Pridham. Okay? And he had a book like this, And he went through and detailed history and everything else. And he talked about livestock and the importance of the soil and all that type of stuff, you know. And sure, they were only a small crowd, but I walked away from that meeting feeling that I had learned a lot from just listening to this man talk about certain things. No, I'm afraid you're right on that score, that we haven't seen the fallout on that. But you see, one of the questions that I have in all of this is that, are there different ways of dealing with land limits in a different way than we've done them in the past? Right now, it is right across the board. Okay? 1,000 acres for you, 1,000 acres for me, 1,000 acres for Patrick Carroll. Okay? 3,000 if it's a corporate. Then, we didn't get into this, but the government passed some regulations and exemptions that if you qualify for some of the land that you have out there in New London, Karen, that you can get up to 40% exemption for different things. And I've got them all here. We don't know what they are, and so forth. So you can go from 1,000 to 1,400. You can go from 3,000 to 4,200. Okay, but I've asked this question a couple of times. I don't know whether I'm asking it the wrong way or not, but people don't seem to want to jump in the bandwagon. Is that why does Horace Carver, a lawyer in Charlottetown, need to have the right to own 1,000 acres of land in Prince Edward Island? If I owned land and it was involved in agriculture, fine. But if it wasn't involved in agriculture, why do I need 1,000 acres? When it was put in 1982, it was put in because that was sort of a higher amount, and not a lot of people thought they would, be within close to limits. As I said before, I own no land. My wife owns half an acre, and that's where our house is in Charlottetown. But, have we reached the point where the limits shouldn't be so much tied into individual rights, but more tied into the use of the land, whether it's agriculture or not, or how much you need in order to do proper crop rotation? I don't know. But if you make it even across the board when what I just said, then why does the person who doesn't respect the land sufficiently and is mining it like Karen says, I don't know if she used that word, but others have, why do those individuals have the right to have an increased amount of limit when they're not good husbands for that which they've already got?
Well, it's a society that PEI has showed an adamant unwillingness to identify those people or
Really?
Oh, definitely.
Well, you just go to the Anne of Green Gables show, and my wife says that the most classic line in all of that is when Marilla and her friend, Rachel Lynn, are standing there, and Matthew or someone's going, no, it's not Marilla, it's Rachel Lynn and some other local gossip is there, and Matthew's going along with the buggy, and one of them says to the other, where's Matthew going? What's he going for? I.e., my wife says, everybody knows everybody else's secrets in Prince Edward Island, and if they don't, they're sure going to find the information. I think people do know who the offenders are in crop rotation.
Oh, definitely. Well, we know who they are, but what have we done about it?
Well, obviously, no one's given me a list of names.
Like I have had no interest in Anne of Green Gables till we got the new man there a couple of weeks ago.
I better stick to my terms of reference. Karen, I think you're going to say something.
You don't even have to, anybody that you don't even have to live in a farm as far as that goes. Even if you drive through the countryside, a lot of farmers now on the island grow soybeans. Soybean has been a significant crop over the last few years. And I know there's a lot of varieties, yes, but you can go from driving by one field and see the height of beans in late season before they've died down. Other like that, okay? And that, to me, is a low bean. You get some others that are like this. They're still in full green foliage. You'll come to another one and you see something like this. Well, it doesn't take much of a soil scientist to figure out that soil is lacking and lacking desperately. And it's not, sometimes I wish it was, it's not from lack of nitrates. It's not from lack of fertilizer. It's because it's, like you say, been mined out. You can go the same, and you're talking crop rotation, you can do the same with crop rotation. If you have a hay field, drive by it, and it doesn't take much to see the rows where they have seeded down that field. In a hay field, you shouldn't be able to see that. That should be full foliage, covered, everything. And if you've got somebody that's working on maximum, or over, I should say, use of that soil, you've got a poor crop. And I don't know how they continue to do it year after year. I don't know how they can farm and continue farming. And another thing that bothered me that you said was about money for farmers. There's a lot of farmers out there that aren't looking for extra money. They're looking for the fact that everybody's playing on the same even ball field. And it's awful maddening to get put in a pot with a farmer who is spraying when the winds are high, because you're all put in the same pot. See one, see them all. Or you have a farmer who is growing a GMO crop who has inadvertently given some of his off seeds through the wind to another farmer who doesn't want them. You're put in the same crop, or you're put in the same pot because you're growing those seeds. So it's right back to the same thing, like where do you start? And as far as Peter said, yeah, the farming community knows these people. But at the same time, those people are the same people who are employing people out there. They are the very same people who happen to be your next door neighbors. And if you talk to them and have a polite conversation, it's awful hard to take it to the next base because, like you say, everybody knows everybody else's business here on the island.
Back row here behind Greg Donald, you guys have been quiet. Any comments?
I'm going to stay quiet.
You're going to stay quiet. Donald, you're going to stay quiet?
I'm not one for public speaking, but I'll try to
Please.
give you. So I'm from the Lower Freetown District. I've been farming since '78. I come home. When I first came home to the farm, I was 18 years old. There was 26 family farms in the Lower Freetown District. That's just the Lower Freetown. That doesn't include Freetown and South Freetown and that. Today, there's 6 active farms. Now, they were taken over. We bought some because my father started expanding in the 60s. He passed away in 90, and my brother and I have a son home with me. We've been slowly expanding. We are not one of the corporations, but we are in the process of corporation, being corporate, because of tax reasons and other issues. Why, as it stands today, we are a 3-year rotation. We are a beef farm, potatoes, and we also have a laying flock of hens. We are a 3-year rotation, as I say. We try to do the best we can on the land, putting back manure, doing the right management plan, and try to follow all the guidelines with the buffer zones that are in place. As of today, we probably will be expanding, like to expand. My son goes to Fort McMurray every winter for 3 months. Money is an issue. Not that we can use them on the farm at this time of the year. We grade all our own crop. We are a seed growing operation. So we ship to Venezuela and all other countries that will accept seed from Prince Edward Island. As I look at the Land Protection Act years ago, it didn't mean nothing to me because we were not close to being up to 1,000 acres as individuals, or now 3,000 as a corporation. When I think I'm still young enough, I think I am, I would like to expand some more. My son, he's coming on. He would like to expand as well. As I look down, I have an old saying, and I don't think I'm too far off. The longer you stand still, the quicker you get run over. And I believe that is the same in the farming industry. I don't care what business you run. I think that's true. As I go forward in the following years, I plan to expand. And if the limits are what they are, I'll probably never meet them anyway, but I think I should have the option to be able to pursue what I need. I look at it, I go to a supermarket. If you go to any Sobeys or Walmart, any place to buy your food, you can buy food from all over the world. If the consumer on Prince Edward Island goes to the section that has tomatoes, for instance, and they are there from Mexico or Canada, and they are cheaper from Mexico, they will buy them because of price. Now, in order to be competitive with that market, we have to either expand or get out. And that's why the Land Act is being reviewed. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Tom. Okay. Did he move you to say anything? Same sentence.
I'm just talking Lower Freetown, but I think you can go across to any community on Prince Edward Island and find the same situation. She's talked about Winkletters. I know the situation up there. And I think any community across, and probably the same up your way, Earl, I don't think any community is immune from being taken over by just a small number of farms. And it's just, I guess years ago, everybody had a big family, and there's always one that stayed home and farmed. But as times changed, that we are better educated, able to travel the world and get a job no matter what, I think that the number of people, I think we're quite fortunate on Prince Edward Island that we have the amount of young people that are willing to sacrifice their lives, I guess you'd say, because someone said to me, farming is, you want to give your son life sentence is what you're giving them for taking over the family farm.
So, what are you suggesting? Certain changes in the limits?
I would like to see them increase some, yes. I think there's room to look at the possibility. I don't know how much, but I think there is room there to look at it.
What do you think about the fact that not everybody's 1,000 acres is the same? Like, you might have 900 acres of clear land, and your Ruddy might have 100 acres of clear land and 900 acres of bush. Should that not be dealt with before the 1,000 acres is changed?
Yes. Yeah.
And like government, I think, thought they were doing that when they increased people's ability to take out the profit zones in there.
Well, I think on every farm that we own, I think we have a brook running through it.
Yes.
And so, that's all included.
Should we deal with that issue? Would it make more sense to deal with that issue than the 1,000-acre issue?
Do you mean if it's at 40% today is just...
Well,
it could be any amount?
I don't know why they picked that 40%, but apparently nobody's able to use that anyway, or apparently there's so much bureaucracy involved in that nobody's... You touched on that.
I think Morley wants to help you out with what
Morley's
you're
doing
saying.
awful well.
He's done awfully well. He hasn't said a word tonight, eh?
I'm waiting for you to ask.
Well,
You said earlier you come back to me, so I just...
I did. I was about to come back, but then Peter stole your thunder on you.
Peter done a good job.
Morley?
I just addressed this gentleman's concern on that exemption or whatever it was that would allow an additional 40%. I looked into it only briefly. I'll confess, if you ask me big details on it, I won't answer. I can't. But I found enough about it that there's enough caveats in it and agreements and deals you have to sign and agree to do this and agree to do that. As I told you at a meeting earlier, More or less, if you're a good little boy and you do this and do that, we let you have this and we let you have that. Well, that's not the way it works today. So that's one reason everybody that knows, but that very few have uptaked on that. And there has been some. There was one fellow at the meeting in Charlottetown that did. And I never got a chance to ask him how he got along. But anyway.
I think there's
One fall out of a room of how many people, more than?
I don't know.
It was a big room.
There's only been 5, I think, of that room
Yeah.
is around. There's only been 5 people able to take advantage of that.
Well, I think there's a few more than that,
Maybe,
but,
yeah.
but the day of the Federation, Morley had made a comment, and I responded with a question. I asked how many people in the room had lands that were qualified for these types of exemptions, so forth. And about 35 or 40 responded, and I asked how many had actually applied, and I don't think there were more than 5 or 6 hands went up.
Very few.
The moral of the story is if we do change the limits, it's not going to change that situation. Like some people will still have maybe 2/3 of their land that they can't plant a crop in.
No, I hear it.
Especially like probably more so in my area or out west where there's more bush and swamp and actual woods that we probably should be holding on to if we can.
Now, I have a feeling that you'd like to say more, Morley.
Whatever is appropriate.
Go right ahead,
I'm
sir.
like Donald, I gotta stand up.
That's fine.
Stand behind the chair here. Mr. Carver, I'm glad to see I'm glad to see the government has taken this initiative to at least look into this, because this has been a burr in some of our routes for quite a little while.
Yes?
Also glad to see you in the position you're in. I think you'll treat us fair. And with that, I'm going to start, if you'll give me a few minutes to go through my little spiel here. I would like to tell you who we are, where we are, how long we've been there, and so on and so forth. And I'll be coming back to that a time or two.
Sure.
And we farm in the Tryon, Albany area. My wife, my 2 sons make up the farm at the present time. My sons are in their early 40s. We grow about 650 acres of potatoes, rotated with cereals and hay and forage. Now stepping back in time of peace, back when I was a young man, my father and I farmed together for years and had a tremendous relationship. And as them times went by, we grew a bit. Every generation, speaking of generations, I'm the 5th. 2 sons I speak of are 6. Grandchildren are 7. So we've been around a long time. And anyway, going back to when my father and I farmed, and we were in the cattle business and the dairy business, and he in his wisdom seeing that I hated fencing. I wouldn't even go with him when we fenced, hardly, unless he pulled me. So I guess he figured that there wasn't going to be much fencing get done by that fellow. So he gradually shifted the thing over to potatoes and the cattle. And the cows, well, one reason the cows went by the wayside is at that time when we were going into fluid milk versus just cream, that's what we were collecting. The barn would require major renovation, which didn't happen. So we strengthened our potato business and have been doing that all over the years. So when the Land Protection Act first came in, I guess I hardly even knew what it was. I was younger and I wasn't even paying any attention to it, to be very honest with you, like a lot of us would have been. And for the first few years, it didn't bother me one way or another, and perhaps still didn't pay any attention to it. In 1991, my father passed away. So he had some pieces of properties, which became mine at that point in time. I was the only son. And so that's the way that went. And I, over the years, had acquired some properties as well. One of the inflictions that we have, and I call it affliction, you'll see why in a minute, is that we're in an area where there's a tremendous amount of woods. And that piece, 1,000 acres of property that he turned over to me, only had a little over 600 acres of land that you could work. We were growing our potato business. I had acquired some land, as I just said, but that land also had some wood involved. So, not too long after Father passed away, as time went on, legal work got done, and land changed hands, I all of a sudden got acquainted with Iraq. A letter from Iraq stating that you were over your land limits by 200 some acres and you have so long to get rid of 200 some acres of ground. Well, that was a marriage that never got off the ground because that started wars almost in my world. But nevertheless, we did have to adhere to that because Iraq, in their wisdom, or in my situation, the lack of wisdom, have a lot of power, and they grandfathered it for a little while. I can't say how long for sure that was. And at the end of the day, I still thought it was grandfathered. At the end of the day, no, you got to get rid of that. So in the meantime, we had to report. If you were over 750 acres, you have to report every year. Be a good little boy and report. So we were reporting 1,200 acres, because that's what I thought I had. All of a sudden, another letter comes. You are out of compliance with the rules. You have to get rid of this. So that's when the letter came to get rid of it. So, what am I going to do? Father's dead, 2 teenage sons still in school, trying to build a business up, and this Iraq outfit in town telling me I got to get rid of 200 some acres of ground. Wasn't a very good feeling, and it set off a set of circumstances where to this day, if I talk about Iraq, it's all negative. So I'll not say too much about it.
When you talk about Iraq, it's what?
All negative.
All negative.
They done us a tremendous amount of damage, as you can see. Now, we tried over the years, the Federation, I think, did, in conjunction with the Federal Board, we tried more than one time to get the government to count only arable land and remove the woodland, swamps, waterways, brooks, all that from the equation. I myself, representing ourselves, met with the Premier one time on this situation. But he told me one time before he was a nominated leader that if he became Premier, he would look into this. So I took him up on that. And I made a presentation, and I will not relay exactly the way he acted, but I was extremely disappointed. He was not the man I spoke to prior to his being nominated as leader. And he basically told me that I was pretty well out of line. So, okay, sir, if that's the way you feel about it, that's the way you feel about it. So, time went on. If the family had not been willing to take on land, ownership in their name, our farm probably would not have operated today because we wouldn't have been able to do the things we need to do when we need to do them. But they were willing to do that. So therefore, I didn't get rid of the land. I did, yes, in one sense of the word, but it was off to different family members. Now, anybody who tries to run a farm reasonably well and does it in a way that is legally run right, not just legally, but transition can take place property. That's left us with a bunch of people owning a bunch of land, which we have to now, somehow or other, get back into some form of order. And so that, we will be working on that. Losing my train of thought here for a second. But anyway, when, excuse me a second.
Worley, just ask you a question. We're all 30 years older than we were when this came in.
That's correct.
And, you know, you're in your mid-60s, are you? Or?
Yeah, past that. Thank you very much, just saying.
Well, I guess